The fire started in the small hours, like a thief slipping in while the house was breathing its last slow breaths of sleep. I woke to the taste of smoke in my mouth, a metallic fear that vibrated under my ribs. The bedroom light was a halo of orange through the curtains, and the hallway was a river of heat. I remember the way the picture frames on the wall seemed to melt into the wallpaper, how the old wooden floor sighed and gave. I grabbed what I could. My husband's watch that no longer worked, a photo album with yellowed corners, the little porcelain ballerina my mother had given me the year I turned 9, and then I ran into the night in my slippers, hair a white halo from the heat, neighbors' lights blinking like distant stars. Firefighters arrived like men on a mission. Hoses hissed, boots thudded, commands cut through the smoke. They did what they could, but the house was old and greedy with fuel. Flames ate the roof in minutes. I stood across the street wrapped in a borrowed blanket, clutching the tiny bag of things that still meant the world, while the rest of my life folded up in smoke and ash. I watched the kitchen, the living room, the cabinet where I kept letters from my late husband, gone. The mantel where we once placed a tiny tree each Christmas, gone. The grief was physical, not just emotional. It sat in the center of my chest like a hot coal. The shelter bus came and took a few of us. They gave me a toothbrush, a paper cup of coffee that tasted like grief, and a blanket that smelled like other people's stories. I should have felt grateful, but gratitude was a small, polite bird that couldn't find the strength to beat its wings. I was 62, with a back that complained in the cold and a head that remembered more losses than it had years. I had tried for months to keep up with repairs, to patch a roof, to fix a leaking pipe. Little by little, I had been gathering pennies and patience. Then the night of the fire made all the careful saving and small repairs meaningless. When the initial shock had thinned like smoke in a breeze, one thought kept rising on top of the rest: my son. He lived 2 towns over, in a place where the bushes were trimmed and wives smiled through dinner parties. He had a job that required a crisp shirt and a briefcase. He had children who loved his voice and a house with enough rooms to echo laughter in comfortable ways. When I called, his number felt like godsend and threat rolled into one. He answered on the second ring. Mom. His voice was, how to describe it? Polite, curved with the practiced softness you use when you are about to put a thorn between your teeth and pretend it's impossible to feel. Mom, what's going on? Are you okay? My house burned down, I said, and my voice cracked like an old board. I could hear sirens still in the distance in my memory, and the blankets at the shelter pressed against my knees like a poor shield. Everything's gone. There was a silence that held the shape of a thunderclap. Oh my God. He sounded hurt, shocked, embarrassed. It was hard to tell through the noise. Are you hurt? Are you with anyone? No, I said, the city and its shelters and the cold making the word small. I'm at a shelter now. Silence again. A shelter? Mom. He swallowed, and I imagined him pacing in his kitchen, the soft light in the background, perhaps his wife at the sink. Listen, I'm really sorry, but we can't have you here. The kids, with school and schedules. It's just complicated. Complicated. The word felt like a closed door. What do you mean? I have nowhere to go. I lost everything. I know. He was talking fast now, the voice of someone trying to close a wound before it had time to bleed. We can give you some money. I'll transfer you some tonight. You can get a hotel for a few nights, and we'll figure it out. I'll call around and see what I can do. What about staying here? Just for a while? I won't be in the way. The words were honest and small. I felt like a child asking permission, though I had raised him. It's not that, Mom. He hesitated, the sorrow folding into something colder. It's just the house. My wife's parents are visiting, and we don't have the space, and the kids. Well, they get scared. It would be too much. Money will be easier. I promise, I'll help. He said I'll help. He offered money. He did not offer his home, his arm, a couch, the simple human dignity of a warm bed. I told myself to be grateful for the money, but grief has a way of twisting gratitude into shame. I could feel the tears as if they were a current pushing me under. I can't take your money, I said, but before I could stop the words, the real thing slipped out. You could have said yes. There was a clicking sound of plates put down, a breath drawn. Mom, I'm sorry. It was the sort of apology that didn't land. Listen, you shouldn't be alone right now. Take the money. I'm driving to work. I'll call later. We hung up with promises like damp paper towels, useless for anything but making the hands feel busy. I sat under the shelter lamp and let the phone cool in my palm. Embarrassment flushed my cheeks, but it wasn't embarrassment at being made homeless by fire. It was the sharper pain of rejection, the stunned realization that the son I had raised with bedtime stories and bandaged knees could turn away in a moment when everything I had was smoke. The next days became a series of small humiliations. There were forms to fill out, and people who used polite language while their eyes measured me up and down. I slept in a motel paid for by the transfer he said he'd made. It was clean and smelled faintly of lemon and false comfort. I called friends who sent prayers and casseroles wrapped in foil, neighbors who had known me since I was a girl, college friends who wrote, "Call me anytime." They were kind in ways people can be when their own survival is intact. Their kindness kept me afloat in practical ways, but not in the hollow places. My life had been a house of ordinary rituals, a cup always in the same place, a kitchen drawer of mismatched Tupperware, a window where we watched the rain, and without it, I felt untethered like a bell without a rope. Every day I scanned my phone for a call or a text from him. I tried to imagine what it would take for him to open his door, an apology, a sudden bankruptcy, a child who needed an extra bed. I wanted to call him and say, "Do you remember the time you scraped your knee on the driveway and I held you and sang that ridiculous lullaby? Do you remember the Little League games?" But memory is a strange thing. How it can be a weapon when held one way and a bomb when held another. Instead, I kept my dignity like a coat I was too cold to unbutton. Weeks passed. The insurance moved slowly, as if by moving slowly it would scrape less of my soul away. Some of my things were salvageable. A firefighter had saved a ceramic bowl from the sink, blackened but whole. When the social worker asked if I had family to stay with, I had to write his phone number on a form and not look at it. Then, one evening, as autumn pressed the air down and made everything take on a brittle tone, the call came. He said, "Mom, can you come over? I want to talk." My chest did not know whether to hope or brace. I drove to his house because what else does a mother do when a son asks? He met me at the front door, and his face had the worn look of someone who had been thinking too much about the past few weeks. His hands were not steady. "Can I come in?" I asked. He stepped aside. The house smelled like cinnamon and detergent. I walked in and felt the ghost of my own kitchen in the way his home held itself together. Clean lines, a coffee mug that lived on a coaster. His wife appeared from the other room, polite and quick with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The children's laughter came from upstairs, a sound that made my throat ache. We sat at the table. He fidgeted with a napkin. "Mom, I've been thinking about the night you called. I wasn't fair to you." He sounded contrite, and for a moment my heart fluttered. I was scared. I didn't want to bring disruption into the house. My wife was worried. I thought he stopped. "You were scared," I said. "Of what?" "Of what having you here would mean. Of the truth people might see. Of responsibility." I thought that giving money would be an easier way to help without changing things. The admission landed like a hand on my shoulder, light, but present. "You were ashamed," I said. It wasn't a question. He flinched. "Maybe. But Mom, I want to try to make it right. We can make room. We can clear out the office. The kids have their beds. We can—" I wanted to believe him. I wanted to fold into his arms and be the woman who had once stayed up late, sewing Halloween costumes and reading stories with exaggerated voices. But something had shifted. The night I stood across the street watching my life burn had rearranged my view of him. The son I had loved was still there, but now a younger version of him had the power to hurt me, and he had used it. "I don't need your pity," I said. "I need your presence." He reached for my hand. "I'm sorry, Mom. I was wrong. I can't take back what I said, but I can be here now. Please, let me help." I looked at his wife. Her eyes were guarded, and then at the children who came down the stairs in pajamas, blinking like sleepy planets. I thought about the nights I had tucked him in, the sandwiches I had cut into triangles, the bandages I had kissed. Whatever his reasons, he had been my child. That connection didn't evaporate in one phone call. So I went home with them for a while. The house was full and careful. They made space in a closet for my clothes and a narrow bed beside the guest room. They bought me a new toothbrush and placed it in a cup next to the sink. My grandson taught me to use the remote for the television as if teaching an elder a spell that would conjure joy. Every morning his wife would bring me a cup of tea and a look that tried on warmth, and then walked away. choosing to hold back. Within those walls, I felt both seen and invisible. I was watched with a new, delicate curiosity, like someone observing a fragile sculpture. My son was attentive in ways that made me ache. He asked if I wanted help with laundry, offered to drive me to appointments, sat up late with me talking about the small things that had once stitched our days. At the same time, there was a subtle policing of my movements, an unspoken notion that I had been placed there as a temporary project rather than embraced as family. There were nights when I lay awake and listened to the house breathe, feeling like a guest who had been given shelter in exchange for silence. I began to understand that his earlier refusal was not a single moment of cruelty, but a symptom of something larger, a life divided into public triumph and private compromises. He had built walls, literal and imagined, to keep his life tasteful and predictable, and when I arrived with the scent of smoke and history, those walls had to be negotiated. Then something happened that broke me in a way I didn't expect. My son lost his job. It was not dramatic, no scandal, no fire, but a slow retraction of opportunities that left the whole family uneasy. The husband of his boss refused to extend contracts, budgets tightened, and the comfortable rhythm of their life started to stutter. Watching him sit at the kitchen table, staring at a screen that refused to become a lifeline, I saw the color drain from his face in the same places mine had before. The roles shifted. Suddenly it was him who needed help, and the house's careful order teetered. My first instinct was simple and raw. Do not give him the same chance to turn away. Call him, bring coffee, offer words. But the kindness that had often been my reflex was tempered by the memory of that first night. I did not want to be the kind of person who only appears when the storm becomes convenient to fix, nor did I want to be the person who refuses to show up at all. When I sat down across from him that night, there were dark circles around his eyes and a humility that looked foreign on him. "Mom," he said, voice thin, "I don't know how this happened. I feel ashamed. I feel like everything I built is slipping." "You can rebuild," I said. "Not everything is gone." He looked at me, really looked, and let out a breath that could have been a sob or a laugh. "I remember when you taught me to patch holes in a fence, to plant bulbs in the fall. You always said, 'One little thing fixed right now saves 10 later.' I thought I'd lost that, but I don't want to lose it now. I'm sorry for how I treated you. I was afraid of how others might see us. I thought I was protecting something. I was protecting nothing. I was protecting my pride." I reached out and took his hand. It was calloused at the thumb, the same hand that had once held my finger in the dark when he was learning to walk. "Pride can be a heavy thing," I said, "but it's lighter if you set it down." In the weeks that followed, we found a new rhythm, not because his fortunes had returned, but because the story between us had shifted. He cooked meals on nights when the refrigerator held little. I mended shirts and found solace in small stitches. When the insurance finally gave me a settlement, I used it not to buy back what was gone, but to buy time and choice. I rented a small apartment not far from him, a place with a patch of grass where I planted bulbs and a window that caught the morning sun. It was modest and honest, and I could visit without feeling like an intrusion and live without feeling like I was being hidden. My relationship with him changed in ways subtle and honest. He learned to apologize without stringing it with excuses. I learned to accept help without erasing myself. It was not magical. There were awkward moments and the kind of silence that comes when older hurts are touched. But there was also tenderness, a hand on mine in the checkout line, a text to ask how my day had been, a small jar of jam left on my doorstep with a note that said simply, "For you." People like neat endings, but life rarely offers them. The house I had lived in and loved was still lost to the earth and the arrested flames of a night that wanted to reconfigure everything. Sometimes, when the wind is right and the bulbs I planted begin to push green into the soil, I feel something like gratitude, not for the fire, never for that, but for the ways that brokenness can teach the hard lessons of humility and grace. The heartbreak I felt when my son closed his door that night was real and raw and almost became an ocean. But heartbreak, I learned, is also a beginning. It opens a place where truth can grow. He had acted from fear and convenience. He had made a choice that cut me, and in answering that cut, we both were taught about what mattered. He did something that broke my heart. The refusal, the coldness, and then, eventually, something else, the facing of his error and the slow work of making amends. It didn't return what was lost, and it didn't erase the ash in my chest, but it gave us the chance to rebuild something quieter and truer. Now, when I walk past the embers of that life in my memory, I carry a small, warm thing. The proof that even after the worst nights, people can still choose differently. My son and I are still learning how to be in each other's lives again. We are learning that family is not only about shelter, but about showing up, about the bravery of saying, I was wrong, and the courage of saying, I'll stay.